In pre-modern times, if you had ideas, you could go to the forest, you could go to the town, but wherever you went, you were at the prince's or king's territory, and he could regulate whatever you said and whatever you, well, we could regulate whatever you communicated. It's like going into somebody's living room today. Imagine this. A living room is a private space, and you might invite people into your private space. But if you don't like what they're saying, if you don't like how they're behaving, it's your prerogative to kick them out. Imagine that, how I was describing a private living room, that's what entire towns and roads used to be like in pre-modern times. But a public space, as opposed to a private space, is a place that not even necessarily the king gets to regulate. It's this free-for-all. It's a space where anybody can exchange their ideas. Now, these public spaces actually arise largely out of mercantile interests. Remember those investors that I was describing earlier. If I was an investor and I was, say, in Genoa, in Italy, I would probably be very interested in the political situation that was going on in England, and I would be interested in the political situation, maybe the tariffs that were being debated there, because some of the ships that I invested in have trade relationships with Londoners. And so I'm going to be interested in the political happenings that are occurring in England. And people in London are going to be interested in the political happenings that are happening in Italy. How am I going to learn about those sorts of things? Well, I would receive letters, and I would have business associates, and I would write letters to him, he would write letters to me, exchanging news about what's going on. And maybe then there would be news from the colonies. I'd be very interested in this. This begins with an exchange of letters. But then there are going to be some individuals who are very good at communicating and form all kinds of relationships with people all over the place. And they would start using that movable type to print these letters from all over the world in all kinds of different places that describe the political happenings. This is the advent of a newspaper and the development of what we would call news. Now, the ultimate triumph of this is really interesting, are going to be some laws that will eventually develop where the king, for him, in order to behave legally, actually would be required to disseminate his proposals in a newspaper. Now, if you open up a newspaper at home, one of the most fascinating places in a newspaper today is the public notices section. And even the laws in our society today, which are developments of the modern world, our governments are actually required to publish those public notices in a newspaper. That shows us that the government doesn't call the shots. Actually, the government needs to play by the rules, if you will, of this public space. It shows that it's a real public area for the dissemination of ideas. We're going to see the advent of public libraries and new freedoms that people are going to clamor for. Freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, freedom to petition the government for redress of grievances, all of which are freedoms that are designed to protect the rise of a public space rather than the king's living room as an arena where you're allowed to communicate. Now, I said this was important for understanding the context of the Reformation. The Reformation is going to involve an exchange of religious ideas. Well, in order to have an exchange of religious ideas and new printing, you need to have printing presses, and you need to have places where ideas can be legally and freely exchanged, and you have to have arteries of commerce where printed materials can travel from one place to another, so religious ideas and new religious ideas can take place. This forms part of the structural backdrop against which a convulsion of religious ideas can actually occur. And so it's important to understand the political changes, the economic changes, some of the military changes, and the changes in communication that mark the shift from the pre-modern to the modern world in order to appreciate how the Reformation is nestled right in on the hinge of this very important transition.